We've discussed at length previously Regulation 9 and the ability to select players for your nation if they play overseas, which is a big talking point in Australia because in recent years we've started to open that gate a little bit. But it's reared its head again recently with Will Skelton and now desire, fans, coaches, etc. to have him involved in the Wallabies. And at the moment there's a bit of a tug-of-war is how it feels, and he's returning back to La Rochelle. I think it's important and a great opportunity for us with you here. What experience have you had with having to manage that relationship between national team and a club to release players for national duty?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me here. Appreciate it. I'm looking forward to the discussion. Mate, I think obviously, so people understand, Rule 9 allows players to be available for all World Rugby windows, right? So the reality is if Australia wants to pick Will Skelton, they can pick him and La Rochelle can't say anything about it. So the issue is coming down to probably Will's initial intention when he went over. And this was always brought about by teams bringing players over and telling them, you're coming here to play in Europe, but we don't want you playing international rugby and we'll give you lots of money or big O money, right? So I think that dealing with the clubs is the main director of how that will go will be the player. If the player has gone over there with the intention of sort of committing to that club and not thinking too much about international football, moving away from international football, he can't make that agreement in writing, but he can make that agreement spiritually. And therefore, if you talk to the player and he says, look, this is what I've done, etc., which I imagine is what's happening with Will, you try to find the balance in amongst that. And of course, the only way you can really do anything about that is apply your own market pressure, I'd imagine, by trying to offer that player the same amount of money or a certain amount of money to bring them back to Australia to play.
That's been going on for donkey's years though, Check. Like, I remember writing about Adam Ashley Cooper. I think he played at Bledisloe in 2016 and you guys were trying to get him for the rest of the TRC, but Bordeaux basically said no. Like, theoretically, what happens there? Like, are you on the phone literally to the director? Is it a CEO thing? Do you speak in French to woo them over?
The first is the player, right? So let's say in that instance, I don't recall that instance, but anyway, let's say Adam says, Check, I really want to play, but the club's giving me grief, you know what I mean? So I might go there and try and manoeuvre the club or talk to the club and say, listen, here's maybe a plan of if we want him for a particular game, release him for a game, because at the end of the day, the trade-off is this. I can make that player come and play. If he wants to play for Australia, we can call him, right? He can be called unless he retires. Now, at that point, but you don't want to put that player's career or contract in jeopardy, right? So the reality is you try to make it work according to the scenario of each player, which is different. And I think that it's a skill to try to pick, first of all, which games you want to have that player for, and also there's so many things involved. There's salary pressure, Justin, like, okay, we can offset some of this player's salary overseas but still have them play for Australia. But there's a lot of moving pieces that you've got to try and connect and then go to the player and the club and talk about. But it's direct line. I would have spoken to owners, coaches, depending on who the conversation is with, to try and get them feel like, okay, because I don't think it's as much the player missing a game here or there, it's the injury possibility. Because if that player gets injured and then he's out for 12 weeks, 16 weeks, there's a real net effect there for the club.
I think also it's the macro issue of every party entering these arrangements with their eyes wide open, right? So you can't have sporadic squad selection for a resource that's overseas. You need to have a 12-month calendar laid out with these clubs, understanding now, let's call it the Cheika rule back, when your eligibility came into it. So there's never been a hard and fast policy. And what you don't want to do, exactly right, Check, is compromise the player's relationship with their employer. It's not fair to ask the player to make a choice between they're satisfying the employment conditions of a contract that's binding and a REM structure that's pretty rigid and pretty clear, and make that decision to not have to play for the ultimate honour was their national team, right? So World Rugby needs to this is a healthy opportunity. Talent is moving around the world more than ever. people are engaged, players are engaged in different models all around the world, and we want access to the premier market for the national product. We know how valuable that is to the game of World Rugby. World Rugby need to lean in, re-examine Regulation 9 and stop obligating players at ground level to take propositions to their employer and then compromise potentially the longevity of their employment.
Yeah, but mate, as far what World Rugby will say to you, well, Reg 9 is the rule to stop that, because it's about, you know how you say eyes wide open, transparent. Most of the players who have gone overseas from here, maybe the current lot are different, but that era of Will, guys like that, they went there going, well, I'm probably not going to play for Australia here.
Because at the time they couldn't.
They couldn't. And we brought in the 60 capper.
There was no rule. There was just the coach at the time, what he wanted. And, you circumnavigated the 60 cap rule.
For the World Cup.
There was no rule, right?
No. The rule was, no one had ever been brought back from overseas to play.
Right.
So the initial negotiations were myself speaking with, I think, Michael Hawker or whoever was in charge at that time, the early time there, and then starting that whole process with the CEO, with Bill Pulver, etc. And we had specific targeted players in mind of who we wanted to come back for a certain reason. So you're in a bit of a transition phase, but I think for the future, if you can set that clarity up, if you go and what the framework is from an Australian point of view of this is how we want to set this up. We do want to relieve some wage pressure perhaps and let players play overseas if that's what they want to do. But we've got to have some clarity on how many games this player goes. So when they go to their negotiation, they speak to their agent who goes into those clubs overseas. There's absolute clarity of they'll be playing for Australia X amount of times a year if selected. Yeah, I've obviously lived this as well with Argentina, where the Reg 9 affects them totally differently than it does for Australia.